بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Today, alhamdulillah, we're going to begin the next segment of the seerah, and that is the very famous battle, the Battle of Khandaq. The Battle of Khandaq is also called the Battle of Ahzab. And of course, Khandaq, we all know this basic seerah stuff. Khandaq means the trench, and Ahzab means various groups gathered together. Typically, it's translated in English as the Confederates. But Hizb is a group, and Ahzab is the groups. So Ahzab is the various groups. And generally speaking, English seerah authors translate Ahzab as the Confederate armies, meaning the armies of different tribes. This is the meaning of Ahzab, that it's not just one tribe, it is multiple tribes. Now, the Battle of Khandaq, when did it occur? As with many incidents of the seerah, once again there are a number of opinions, and in fact this time the opinion is quite serious because we have people that are very famous on both sides of the equation. So just a little bit of a detail more than usual, otherwise I try to gloss over stuff, because again in the end of the day, frankly, there's very little practical importance. Suppose it happened this year or that year, it's not much difference in terms of benefits we derive, but nonetheless, for the sake of historical accuracy, which year did the Battle of Ahzab occur? There's two main opinions. The first opinion, 4th Shawwal, 4th AH after Shawwal, right? The month of Shawwal in the 4th year of the Hijrah. Now, this means how many years after Uhud? Uhud. When did Uhud take place? When did Uhud take place? Second year? When did Badr take place? We're all getting confused. We're all getting confused. When did Badr take place? Second year. You're all getting confused. This is basic seerah quiz. Badr takes place second, Uhud takes place third. How can you guys be? You said that. Okay. Badr takes place second. Now guys, remember, there's no zero in the seerah. I think this is where you got confused. There's no zero. When the month the Prophet migrated, that is the first. That is the first. There is no zero. Time doesn't have zero. The first year of the calendar is the first year. Badr takes place basically at the beginning of the next year, which is the second year. Uhud takes place the third year. So if it is the 4th year, this means the next year Khandaq took place. Now, what is the evidence that people say took place in the 4th year? The evidence is a very explicit hadith in Bukhari. This is why we have some big giants holding this opinion. Very explicit hadith in Bukhari. First person account. Ibn Umar, the famous son of Umar ibn Khattab, Abdullah. Ibn Umar said, on the day of Uhud, I was 14 years old. And I stood in ranks in Uhud wanting to be accepted. And the Prophet ﷺ, what did he do on Uhud to the 14-year-olds? Rejected me, right? And on the day of Khandaq, I was 15. فَتَجَاوَزَنِي, he let me go by. Okay? So this hadith, it's as authentic as the sun. It's in Sahih Bukhari. It is basically first person narration. And he's saying, I was 14 at Uhud. That's why I was rejected. And then at 15, I was accepted. So if Uhud was 3rd year, which we all agree, that's basically one of the battles, there's no ikhtilaf. Badr and Uhud, there's no ikhtilaf, by the way, right? So if we say that Uhud took place 3rd year, then obviously simple math, Ibn Umar is saying I was 14, when I turned 15, Khandaq took place. So then automatically, by default, that becomes Shawwal of the 4th year. Okay. Who held this position? Major giants. Imam al-Bukhari is at the forefront here. Obviously, he's the one narrating the hadith, right? And one of the most famous authors of the seerah, one of the most famous people of the seerah, his book no longer exists. This is Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri. Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, Imam al-Nawawi, Ibn Hazm, the famous scholar from Spain, Ibn Hazm, he says, there can be no doubt that Khandaq took place in the 4th year of Hijrah. Yani jazama, because there cannot be any doubt. It's crystal clear. Ibn Umar is narrating the first person. How can you doubt that it took place in the 4th year of the Hijrah? However, we all know, many of you have never heard of this opinion that it's the 4th year. We all know that it took place in the 5th year. That's what we've been taught, right? That we have been studied that it's taken place in the 5th year. Where did this opinion come from? This is the opinion of pretty much all of the famous authors of the seerah, starting from Ibn Ishaq to Ibn Hisham, to At-Tabari, to As-Samhudi. We haven't discussed him, but he's a medieval scholar of Egypt who's a specialist in Sirah. Ibn al-Qayyim, who is one of the greatest specialists of Sirah. He's written many treatises, that, I mean not independent, but within his books about the Sirah. Basically, anybody who's basically famous amongst the scholars of Sirah, the specialists of Sirah, they pretty much all agree it took place in Shawwal of 5th year. One or two, by the way, Al-Waqidi and Ibn Sa'd, they said Dhul Qa'dah of the 5th year, but still they said 5th year. That difference is a bit more trivial, 2 months, but 5th year. Now, where is their evidence from? They say piecing together the whole Sirah. You can see I haven't fully recovered. Bismillah. Piecing together the whole Sirah, it doesn't make sense to place Khandaq in the 4th year. It wouldn't fit. This is their point. So they're using a little bit of rationality against an explicit athar, an explicit statement of Ibn Umar, right? So people like Imam al-Bukhari and Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, they really want to stick with the statement as close as possible. Ibn Umar said 14, 15, we add 1 year. But others are more willing to try to see if we can find a meaning, make sense of this, how can it be? And they say that in the 4th year, this was the second promise of Uhud. Remember at the end of Uhud what happened? They said we're going to meet again, right? This is called Badr al-Sughra, the promise of Uhud, right? How then could Khandaq have taken place? And they also mentioned Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. Now one of the key factors, Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, by unanimous consensus, Sa'd dies right after Khandaq. By unanimous consensus, right? And the death of Sa'd basically is marked to the 5th year, right? So piecing together all these other things, they say it must have been the 5th year. Okay, what do we do to Ibn Umar's narration? 14 to 15. What do we do? Al-Bayhaqi says, maybe he had just turned 14, and then in Khandaq he was right at the end of 15. At the Khandaq, right at the end of 15, right? Now, nice attempt, but frankly, that's 2 full years. So it doesn't quite make perfect sense. But to salvage this, we say, who kept track of birthdays back then anyway? Who kept track of birthdays? And because from Shawwal of 3 to Shawwal of 5 is 2 full years. So technically your birthday cannot be, you know, on both of those days that you were 14 and 15. That's really not possible. You are either 14 then 16, or, you know, you get my point here. Still, ala kullin, I mean, the point is roughly who kept track of birthdays. They were not that precise. So this is a valid point that, okay, he was early 13, or sorry, early 14, and then basically late 15, maybe even turned 16. But the point is, he's just trying to say that it was so close apart, and the Prophet let me participate in the battle of Khandaq. And so, inshallah, the correct opinion of the battle of the Khandaq took place in the 5th year of the Hijrah, in the month of Shawwal. Now, what was the battle? How did it start? What was the reason of this battle? The reason of this battle was an instigation by the tribe of the Banu Nadir. The tribe of the Banu Nadir. The tribe of the Banu Nadir had been expelled, if you remember, right? They had been expelled after almost a showdown. Remember? After, what did they do? Remember, what did they try to do? They tried to assassinate the Prophet. And in addition, we said they had done other things as well. But the real thing that was the final, end of it was the blatant attempt by their leaders. They agreed, the 3-4 of their leaders, to throw that rock onto the Prophet ﷺ when he was sitting at their fortress. And the fortress, the point of a fortress, you have access on top. So they said, and they must have had, just like the, we see in the movies and whatnot, they have those big boulders, they have all of this ready to be thrown onto the enemy. So they said, this is your opportunity, let's roll the boulder and throw it down on him, khalas, end of story, right? So this is when they were expelled. Now, what was the condition of expulsion? Who remembers? Leave your weapons, leave all your property, but you may take what your camels can carry, right? And that's why they took their doors even. Whatever your camels can carry, you can take. Where did they go? Khaybar. Where is Khaybar? If you drive, it's less than 2 hours away. Khaybar is in the vicinity, right? Khaybar is not the other side of the world. Driving from Khaybar to Medina is around 2 hours. It's not that far away. So the Banu Nadir are still hoping to get their land back. In the end of the day, land is worth a lot more than the doors that they carried on their camels, right? They had a lot of wealth. They had acres and acres of land. They had entire plains of date fields. This is worth, literally multi-millions of dollars. And what they took was worth tens of thousands. They've impoverished now. So they're greedy to get their land back. So what did they do? They sent an official delegation to Mecca. The tribe of Banu Nadir sent an official delegation to Mecca with all of their seniors. This is a high-level delegation. And the names are given in the books of Sirah. We've only come across some of their names. Salam ibn Abi al-Huqayq, Huyay ibn Akhtab, who is the father of Safiya. She's the one who the Prophet eventually marries. Her father is one of the leaders of the tribe. And all of the other names are mentioned. And they send an official delegation composed of all of the noblemen to go to the Quraysh, and they ask them that let's cooperate together. The Quraysh and the Banu Nadir with the Yahud of Khaybar as well. Let's all cooperate together and simultaneously attack the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they said, we will give you as much money as you need. Now they had the wealth of the people of Khaybar, right? The people of Khaybar also want to help them out because they're obviously the same kith and kin, or the same religion. They said, we want to help you out. And they also have the support of the Quraysh, because the Quraysh is very severely impacted for the last 4 years because of the trade route to Syria having been almost destroyed. Basically, in essence, it has been destroyed. So now the Quraysh, what was their relationship with the Yahud? The Quraysh were somewhat fearful of them, and they had a big inferiority complex. The Quraysh, they felt that this group were worthy to be feared of. Why? Well, number one, they were the Yahud always acted in a manner that they were superior, and this rubbed down on the Quraysh. The Quraysh felt that the Yahud are superior. They literally felt it. Why did they feel it? Because these people have a culture, have a civilization. They have a book, every one of them reads. Remember, the Quraysh are illiterate, right? Every one of them reads. They have a book they claim is from God. And everybody knows that they had an ancient civilization. They have people all over the world. This is a very different culture than the Quraysh. So the Quraysh felt a type of complex, and they never really fully trusted them, but they did have this secret admiration at the same time. And so Abu Sufyan says, and he's astonished that the Quraysh are reaching out, but the Yahud are reaching out to them. Abu Sufyan says, tell me, you are coming to us to fight against Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he says, no doubt, anyone who fights against him is a friend of ours. But, so Abu Sufyan is confused. How can you come to us? Whose religion is closer to your religion? Our religion or his religion? See, because the Quraysh are confused. From their perspective, it seems that the Yahud and the Muslims are very similar. And really, they are. We are. I mean, frankly, there is no religion in the world that is closer to Islam than Judaism. In theology and in laws, the halakha and the sharia are two sides of the same coin. Halakha is literally their term for sharia. And halakha literally means the way. And sharia literally means the way. They call their laws halakha, and we call it sharia. And halakha means the way. And if you compare anything from tahara to at'ima to food and drink to libas, everything is like 80% is almost the same. It's amazing, right? And I mean, I have a footnote here. How did this similarity take place? The Prophet never studied the laws of the ancient Yahud, right? All of these detailed laws, down to the minutiae, it is almost exactly the same. How? Because of course it comes from the same source. Comes from the same source. Otherwise, it's impossible to explain the tashabuh or the similarity. So from the perspective of the Quraysh, why are you coming to us? Aren't you guys basically? So they said, who is more rightly guided? Who is closer to you? Who is closer to the truth? And they said, you are the ones who are more rightly guided than the Muslims, and you are closer to the truth than the Muslims are. Than Muhammad. They didn't say Muslims, they said Muhammad wa ashabuhu. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions, right? At this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exposed their plot in the Quran, and He quoted them directly. And we recite these verses to this day. Surah An-Nisa, verse 50. Surah An-Nisa, verse 50. أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ يَزْعُمُونَ أَنَّهُمْ أُوتُوا نَصِيبًا مِنَ الْكِتَابِ. Don't you look at those people, they think they have been given a portion of the book. وَيَقُولُونَ لِلَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. And yet they say to those who have disbelieved, هَؤُلَاءِ أَهْدَى مِنَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا سَبِيلًا. They say to the Quraysh, these people, you are more rightly guided than the believers in your path. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quoted them and exposed their plan, that there's been a collaboration between the Banu Nadir and between the Quraysh. So after they convinced the Quraysh and the Quraysh willingly agreed, the Yahud then sent a delegation to the tribe of Ghatafan up north. So they go to the Quraysh down south, and then they send a delegation up north to Ghatafan. And Ghatafan was the largest tribe up north. And the Quraysh is the most prestigious and the most well-armed and the most connected tribe down south. The two immediate tribes that can come down and come up to Medina, right? And Allah says in the Quran, إِذْ جَاءُكُم مِّن فَوْقِكُمْ وَمِنْ أَسْفَلَ مِنْكُمْ. Some have said, this translate says, when they came to you from above and from below. Some have said from north, the Ghatafan, and from south, the Quraysh. Right? إِذْ جَاءُكُم مِّن فَوْقِكُمْ وَمِنْ أَسْفَلَ مِنْكُمْ. We're going to get to these verses, I'm jumping the gun. But the point being, they send a delegation to Ghatafan. And the Ghatafan, they don't really have that big of a vested interest. Sure, they've been irritated a bit, but it's not as if they're depending on the trade route. You see, Quraysh, the trade route was their lifeline. It was their blood. If they don't have the trade route, they cannot exist. Right? As for the Ghatafan, no doubt they benefited, but they don't have the lifeline of the caravans. That's the whole point of the Quraysh. رِحْلَةَ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ. Only that tribe needed it. So the Ghatafan needed convincing. They're ambivalent. They're not ruling it out, but they need to be convinced. So they offered them the only thing they know how to offer: wealth. And they said, we will pay you half of the produce of Khaybar for 1 year. That's a fortune. Half of the produce of Khaybar for 1 year for this one battle. Basically, they hired mercenaries. Basically, they bribed them to come and attack. Now the Ghatafan were a Bedouin tribe. Out of all of the tribes, they were known to be the most wild, really. I mean, the most uncouth and also the most barbaric, right? So this is actually a win-win for them. They get the money, and the Banu Nadir wants a wild tribe. It wants a very uncouth tribe. It wants somebody like this without any morals and whatnot, right? Of course, this would flip against them because the first tribe to flee was also the Ghatafan. But again, you get the point here. When you have people like this, they're not fighting for a cause. They're hired mercenaries, right? These are people, they just want your money. And they have no genuine interest to be there other than the money. So half of the wealth of Khaybar for 1 year has been promised to them. And so the Ghatafan got on board as well. When the Ghatafan and Quraysh both agreed, now the Quraysh sent out delegations to the smaller tribes that were affected by the trade route. And these were, the names are mentioned here, the Banu Asad, the Banu Sulaym, the Banu Murrah, the Ashja', the Banu Kinana. Each one, they're asking them for help, for madad, and each one of them is doing something. Either they send them weapons, or they send them 15, 20 or 100 people, or they send them, this was very common, they would send their slaves. Because again, this is what the way the world works back then. We're not going to go take our 50 slaves, just go take them, right? And so the point is, every one of these tribes is helping in arms, in weapons, in armor, in horses, whatever is convenient, whatever is. And all of these tribes, their main interest is the caravan. Other than the Ghatafan, they're getting the mercenary hired by the Banu Nadir. Now, this really was a win-win situation for all of these groups, at least so it appeared. For all of these groups, it's a win-win situation. For the Quraysh, it's literally an offer coming out of nowhere. Falls down right into their lap. They're looking for a way to get back to the Prophet ﷺ. And Uhud was not a victory. The year after Uhud, the second Badr turned out to be, they gave an excuse. They weren't able to go. They themselves were worried about another confrontation. They have seen the bravery. They have seen the fearlessness of the Muslims. And they don't want to meet them again. They're not qualified just by themselves to meet them again. So out of nowhere, the Banu Nadir comes and they say, Khalas. Now, when the Banu Nadir comes on board, by the way, not only will money come, very important, food. The Quraysh are not farmers. The Quraysh do not have access to much food. The Banu Nadir are at Khaybar, and dates are like a manna from heaven for the Arabs at that time, right? You can just pack it and take it in the desert and it'll last for the longest time, and that you can subsist for many days off of dates, right? So they will get lots of supplies for future events as well. That's the whole point here. It's a win-win situation. As for the Banu Nadir, they realize that they don't have the manpower to fight alone. And they are not as skilled in the arts of war. What were the Banu Nadir and the Banu Qaynuqa and what was their main tactic? Fortress. Fortress. The main tactic was defense. You can't attack us because we had a fortress. End of story. What are you going to do? The fortress is thicker than your horses. How long are you? We have all the dates we need. We have all. What's it? The Banu Nadir, their main defense mechanism was impenetrable, right? And that was the concept of just having a fortress. As Allah says in the Quran, we quoted this last time, وَظَنُّوا أَنَّهُمْ مَانِعَتُهُمْ حُصُونُهُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ. They thought that their fortresses could protect them against Allah. They thought their fortresses could protect them against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They don't have any fortresses. It's all been conquered. So they're not going to fight by themselves. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran about them and their ilk, ضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ الذِّلَّةُ أَيْنَمَا ثُقِفُوا. Wherever they are, wherever they go, they are in humiliation. Wherever they go, they are despised. Right? Why? How so? إِلَّا بِحَبْلٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَحَبْلٍ مِّنَ النَّاسِ. Except if they get some. Now, habl, yani, literally it means a rope, right? But the meaning here is type of protection or madad, yani, some type of protection. Unless Allah Azza wa Jal gives them some help from His qadr, or other people help them out. They cannot stand independently. They always have to get the help of others. And this is the reality as really history itself has demonstrated. So, the Banu Nadir, they reached out to the Quraysh and they got the help from the Quraysh. And this is what the reference is, that they need this habl min al-nas. They need this help from the people, or else they cannot do anything. As for the other tribes, we explained that some of them, they were affected by the trade, but primarily the Ghatafan, it was basically the money that was promised. And also, by the way, skirmishes have started. We already talked about what happened. The Bi'r Ma'una and all of these skirmishes have started between northern tribes and the Quraysh. And there's already tension is mounting, so no doubt they're thinking long term. And again, it's a win-win situation. Might as well just get rid of this potential rising force once and for all. And there's no doubt that one of the combining factors was hatred of this new religion, right? Just sheer hatred. This is a new religion. It's something not our forefathers. We don't want anything to do with this. So these are all of the reasons for the battle of Khandaq. Now, Abu Sufyan, of course, took charge because, again, he is the senior most military commander and one of the senior noblemen. There were other nobles that were alive that were of a similar prestige as Abu Sufyan, but Abu Sufyan was the most potent warrior. He was the most, the fighter amongst them. So he is put in charge of the entire Khandaq, just as he was put in charge of Uhud 2 years before this. And Ibn Ishaq mentions an estimate that they were around 10,000 men, and this is the number that is put in the books of Sirah. Obviously nobody took statistics, obviously nobody is doing, there are no journals or whatnot, but yani, you get the point that they were, you know, quadruple or triple or quadruple the quantity of Muslims, right? All of the people of Medina could not have been more than 2,500 men. They could not have been more than 2,500 fighting men. And you have, even if it's quadruple, even if it was 7,000-8,000, there's simply, you know, no way that you're getting Ghatafan, you're getting the Quraysh, you're getting the Banu Sulaym, you're getting all of these tribes. All of them are marching to Medina. This is an unprecedented situation, and in fact it is unprecedented in the history of the Arabs. Now, we also see another thing happening, and that is all of the Arabs are uniting under two banners: the banner of Islam and the banner of Kufr. Never before has this happened. Before this time, the Arabs have been a disparate people, a tribal people. Maximum 2 tribes will form a temporary alliance to fight a 3rd tribe. Maximum. Never before have 10, 15 tribes all come together. Never. And now we're having a showdown, the likes of which Arabia has never seen. And this is showing us that things are changing at such a radical pace that within 10 years of the Prophet's mission and message, within 10 years, or a little bit more than 10, subhanAllah, we have probably around 15,000 people now fighting, on both sides added together. And this is a showdown between Islam and Kufr. And within 5 years after this, of course, the showdown will come to an end. Now, Abu Sufyan basically told them to meet at a preconceived, basically agreed upon place. So the Qatafan came down, the Quraysh came up, the other tribes, they all came, and they met at a place which is mentioned in the books of Sirah. And of course, by this time now, you cannot hide this type of numbers, right? You cannot hide these types of numbers. The news has reached the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and as usual, and this was his sunnah at Badr and at Uhud, and now we see it at Khandaq. This is always his sunnah. As usual, he convenes a gathering of all of the Sahaba in the masjid. And he tells them exactly the situation. And then he says, what do you think should be done? What do you think should be done? Now the books of Sirah do not mention too many options given. And in my opinion, this is because, until Salman gave his option, this is because there wasn't much of an option to give, right? Allahu A'lam, but what can you do when 10,000 people are attacking? You simply have to figure out where to fight and then fight. They really did not have much to say until finally, as we all know, Salman al-Farisi, and this was the first battle that he was able to participate in. It took a few years to free him. You remember the story of Salman al-Farisi? We went over it in a lot of detail, that at this time he's already probably 70 years old at this time. He has lived a very long life, probably even 100. I mean, at this time, we don't know. Maybe some books say he died at the age of 120. And if that is true, then when this battle is taking place, then he's probably 100 years old then. So Salman al-Farisi, we know he went through a long life. He was first a Zoroastrian, and then he became a Christian, and then after one monk, and then a second, and then a third, and then a fourth monk, and then finally that. And each time he's living 5, 10, 15 years with these monks, right? Until finally the last of these monks says, go to the land of date palms, because the Prophet is just about to come. And you will know him because, what are his signs? Who remembers? Number 1, the seal on his back. Number 2, he won't eat charity, but he'll accept gifts. And then number 3 was the land of the date palms, right? And Salman wanted to make his way to Khaybar, because that's where date palms were. By the way, Khaybar was the number 1 producing dates of the entire region, more than Medina, much more than Medina, right? Khaybar was far larger than Medina. So even Salman thought Khaybar. But then Allah willed, he got taken as a slave and sent to Medina, even though he didn't intend Medina. And so eventually he came to the Prophet, and we all know the story, and he told him the whole story, and the Prophet showed him the seal and whatnot when he told him, and Salman agreed with his master to be freed for a preposterous sum, right? A preposterous sum. If you can plant, I don't know, 100 or something, I forgot now how much it was, a lot of date palms, and they grow to their full, then I'll free you. Now it's going to take 15 years to grow to their full, right? How are you going to do this? So Salman came to the Prophet and told him what happened. The Prophet said, call me when the season comes. When it's time to plant, call me. And the Prophet himself went and he laid every single seedling himself. All of the numbers that needed to be laid, he did it himself, right? And obviously when he does it, what do you think is going to happen? And so within a few years, basically much expedited process, Salman al-Farsi is freed. So he was not able to participate at Badr and Uhud because he's a slave, right? Now in Khandaq, he becomes free. And Khandaq was his first battle. He was able to participate, and he couldn't participate physically too much because he's this old, but we all know he gave them the plan. He said, back in our hometown in Iran, in Persia, back in our home, we have a tactic we used to do, and that is to dig a trench and basically use this as a means of protection against us and our enemy. And for the first time in Arabia, this idea was imported. Now, by the way, this shows us a very important point, and that is Islam, and this is historically always the case, is very open to new ideas. That when it comes to technology, innovation is positive. And when it comes to rituals, innovation is negative. When it comes to other ideas, right? This is not an Arab custom. They've never done it before, right? This is a custom of the Persians. but it's something that is useful and beneficial. And this really shows us the Prophet himself, and this is not the only example. There are so many examples that something that is taking place in another culture, but it's nothing to do with rituals or theology. You see, when it comes to aqeedah, when it comes to rituals, when it comes to our worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we don't care about how other people do it. That's we have ours, lakum dinukum waliyadin. But when it comes to living in this world, when it comes to technology, when it comes to anything to do with this dunya, we benefit from all experiences. And we don't care about where it comes from. As the process, actually, there's a difference. Is this authentic hadith or not? Al-hikmatu dallatul mu'min. Wisdom is the lost item of the believer. There's a controversy, is hadith authentic or not? So we'll just say it's a saying for sure of the Arabs, of the Salaf. Al-hikmatu dallatul mu'min. Wisdom is the lost item of the believer. He picks it up wherever he finds it. Now, by the way, this incident is something about technology. Even knowledge that is related to this dunya and not about technology, our Prophet ﷺ took it. For example, he said, I was about to prohibit you from ghila, and ghila means to have a child with your wife when she's feeding one child. So before the child is breastfed, finished, you have another child within the first 2 years. He said, I was going to prevent you from doing this. But then I saw the Romans and Persians have children one after the other, and it doesn't harm them. So go ahead and have children one after the other, basically, right? Now, this is basically a topic of humanities or sociology or whatever, anthropology, whatever you call it, right? And our Prophet is saying, I looked at the other cultures and they don't have a problem, so go ahead and do it as well. And this clearly shows us psychology, history, whatever, all of these sciences, yallah, bismillah, take them as long as it doesn't contradict our sharia. By the way, even more, the Prophet ﷺ even adopted cultural icons or cultural things not necessary for him to adopt, simply because this was the norm of the known world. For example, the first time ever that he sent a letter to Heraclius, they said to him, O Messenger of Allah, those emperors do not accept any message from another ruler unless it has a sealed wax on it. And that's so that the ruler knows direct. No messenger has read it. This is the custom. If you are a ruler, you're a leader, you are our leader, you need to have this. So our Prophet ﷺ asked around, how does this done? So they told him, you need a special signature that is unique to you. Nobody else can imitate it, right? So that was when he ordered a ring to be made. And on it, it was written, Muhammad on the bottom line, Rasul on the second line, and Allah on the top line. Right? And this was done to give respect to Allah even in writing. That the name of Allah is the highest. وَكَلِمَةُ اللَّهِ هِيَ الْعُلْيَا. To give respect to the name of Allah. So he took the ring, Muhammad Rasulullah, made out of silver. And he would use this ring every time he sent a letter, put it in wax, and then put it in there. Now this shows us a very important point. And wallahi, this is, inshallah, none of you in this room, but wallahi, we have this attitude very prevalent in the ummah. Oh, this is the system of the kuffar, we cannot do it. This is the way of the disbeliever. And did our Prophet ﷺ say, I don't care what the kuffar do, this is the way I'm going to do things? There's a system. The world is operating by this system. Is there anything haram to have wax and seal the letter? No. Did Allah prohibit it? No. If that's the way the world is working, so be it, we also work that way. Right? And this clearly shows us the open-mindedness. Anyway, that was a complete tangent. I don't know, completely unprepared. Wasn't planned. But the point being, no problem taking from the cultures, the customs, the knowledge of others, as long as it does not explicitly contradict something that we're not allowed to do. So the Prophet ﷺ agreed to this, and he also said, right at the beginning he said, and look how far ahead he's thinking. He said, we should also gather together all of the women and children and send them to the fortress of the Banu Haritha. And this fortress, the Banu Haritha had taken this tactic from the Yahud. They had learnt it from the Yahud. They had imitated a fortress. So the Banu Haritha, of course, are from the Ansar. The Banu Haritha are from the Ansar. Right? And the Banu Haritha, by virtue of the fact they're living with the Yahud for centuries, so they had basically built their own fortress. And this was the largest fortress that the Ansar owned. Now, it was not built by the Yahud, so it was obviously not to that standard. They were the masters. But they had taken whatever they could, and they had an equivalent as much as they could. And this was the most protected fortress of the Ansar. And by the way, most of the Ansar did not have fortresses, because only some of the tribes they had imitated from the Yahud. So to copy them, they had done this. So the Banu Haritha had the largest fortress. Now, the Prophet ﷺ was worried. He's already thinking so many steps ahead. And nobody told this to him. This was his own planning. The Prophet ﷺ was worried that all of the men are going to be busy manning and guarding the perimeters. And inside of Medina, there is still the tribe of the Banu Qurayza. And the Banu Qurayza, we don't know where their loyalties will lie. You see, this is why Ahzab was so sensitive. And this is why what happened to Banu Qurayza happened. That, remember, Banu Qaynuqa' has been expelled. Then the Banu Nadir has been expelled even more harshly. And now there's only one tribe left. And this tribe, even though they have taken 3 separate promises. Now again, this is the point here. Every time the Prophet gave them an option out. After the Banu Qaynuqa', well, in the beginning the contract or the Treaty of Medina, the constitution. Then after the Banu Qaynuqa', he got the contract again from Banu Nadir and from the Banu Qurayza. And they both agreed. Then after the Banu Nadir, he first, remember we talked about this, when he was expelling the Banu Nadir, on his way to the Banu Nadir, he goes to the Banu Qurayza. On his way to the Banu Nadir. And he tells them, basically, you know, are you still agreeing to the treaty that we have agreed to? Or do you want to change your minds? Do you want to still agree to this or leave peacefully? And they promised by Allah, the halaf that they gave, that they're still upon that constitution, right? So then he goes to the Banu Nadir and expels them. So now the Banu Qurayza, the last of the 3 tribes, the Banu Qurayza, Allahu A'lam what's going to happen. Because if they flip, if they turn around and become a 5th column, this is almost certain disaster unless Allah helps them. Because they're on the inside of the perimeters. So the Prophet ﷺ is automatically thinking, one of the first things he does, as soon as he gives the commandment to build the trench, he also says, send the women and children to the Banu Haritha's fortress. And that fortress, by the way, it has a name. They used to name their fortresses, their camels, you know, this was the custom. They used to name these things, and it was called Al-Fari', Al-Fari'. And so he said, send them to Al-Fari'. And of course, the fortress, the fortress of Al-Fari', I mean, we don't have much information about it. I mean, one of the stories that we know, the famous story that when the women and children went there, Abdullah ibn Zubayr went as well, by the way. How old is Abdullah ibn Zubayr at this point in time? Quick quiz, very simple quiz. Because, exactly, he's 5 years old. Right? He's 5 years old. Well, technically he's 4. Technically he's 4 years old. Because he was born. Guys, we went over this. Abdullah ibn Zubayr. Yeah, but when was he born? Even more precise, we know. Right at the entry. Right at the entry. He's born at Quba. He's born at Quba. And Abdullah ibn Zubayr's birth was an optimistic birth because it gave them good news, the new life. They took it as a positive omen. And we can have positive omens in Islam. We've said this many times, right? You're allowed to have positive omens. You can't have negative omens. They took it as a positive omen. So Abdullah ibn Zubayr is around 4 or 5 years old. And he remembers. He has memories. He's a kid, right? By the way, also, Umar ibn Abi Salama was with him. Umar ibn Abi Salama is the son of Salama and Abu Salama. And so he is the quote-unquote stepson. I mean, that's the English term. By stepson, we mean the son of the Prophet's wife. Salama's son, Umar. Now, I have to pause here, go into a tangent. It's very important. It's a bit awkward tangent about the story of Hassan ibn Thabit and the fortress. It's a bit of an awkward tangent, but it is very, in my opinion, very beneficial. It's a very beneficial tangent. And this is really the only story I have about the fortress. So we'll just put it right here, even though chronologically this happens another week or later. But because the fortress is mentioned, we're just going to mention it now and then move on, and don't worry about the fortress after this, right? The issue is that the women and children were sent to the fortress, right? And it is said that 1 or 2 very elderly men who were, 70, 80 years old or blind or whatnot, basically the invalid, were sent. There was only one young man sent with them, and that is Hassan ibn Thabit. There was only one man who potentially, when I say young, relatively, I mean he wasn't 20 at the time, but you get the point. He could have been on the front lines for him from his age. He might have been maybe 40, 50 years old, Allahu Alam how old, but he would have been a man that, like all the rest of them, like Abu Bakr, they're not in their 20s or 30s either. Why? This is an area of tariq and history that frankly most of us don't hear about, and it is better we don't hear about it. But at the same time, someone like me, I don't want you to hear about it from the wrong sources. Number one. Number two, I firmly believe that everything in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ has much wisdom and benefit for us. And therefore, I mention these narrations because I feel there's a lot of benefit. Now, the version of Musnad Imam Ahmad goes, and the narrator, by the way, is Abdullah ibn Zubair. And he's a child, but he's narrating when he's an adult, right? That he says in Musnad Imam Ahmad, that he says that the women and children and myself and other kids, because he's a kid now, I mean he's 5 years old, what do you expect him to do? They were put into the fortress along with Hassan, and Hassan was Jaban. And that basically means he was not brave. Let's just put it politely. Okay? He was not brave. And so he was not of those who could carry a weapon. He was not of those who could, it is said that when he carried a weapon he would tremble. Yani he was not of the type to fight in a battle. Right? Now, by the way, not to be very stereotypical, but subhanAllah, Allah created people differently. Generally speaking, those involved in the arts are not known for their valor and bravery. Right? And Hassan was known for what? Poetry. Right? Generally speaking, this is, these days they have this left brain, right brain, all of these types of things, they talk about it, right? Generally speaking, those that are involved in, the fine arts and whatever, painting or poetry or whatnot, they have a different mizaj. They have a different, way of doing things. And this is the way Allah created us. So Hassan could not carry a sword. And another Sahabi says the word Jaban, which is a very harsh word actually, but let him say it. We're just quote what he says, and it basically means he was not brave. You understand the point here. So he's put with the women and the children. Now, he's the only man in the fortress. Now, a week later, we're not going to talk about it in that point, but when the Quraysh are outside the city, when the Ghatafan have come, the Banu Qurayza decide to flip, right? The Banu Qurayza, they decide to flip. And the first thing that they do, and you really need to understand this to understand what happens to them. The first thing that they do is not to attack the men. It is to figure out how to execute all of the women and children. Think about that. Then put into perspective their punishment. Right? So they send two people to Al-Fari' to see whether it's protected or not. Now the Yahud at the time, they lived in Awali, and Awali was a distance away from Al-Fari'. So they send two scouts in the middle of the night to see is it protected or not. If it's not protected, they're going to come back and then launch an offensive, and the purpose being that basically you'll demoralize and you will have the advantage and you'll allow a passage for them to come in. So they decided that they're going to send these two. Now, in the middle of the night, Safiya bint Huyay, Safiya bint Abdul Muttalib, Safiya bint Abdul Muttalib, the Amma of the Prophet ﷺ, right, Abdul Muttalib's daughter. Safiya hears a noise. Somebody's climbing. Somebody has a rope and he's whispering. She hears a noise. And she wakes up Hassan because he's the only man. And she says to Hassan, go out and defend us. Go out and do something. And he says, O Ammatu Rasulillah, O aunt of the Prophet ﷺ, may Allah bless and reward you. You don't humiliate me more. You know this is not my field. And don't make it worse. You know I can't do this, right? That's why I'm here in the first place, right? And so what does she do? She takes a male shawl, like the shawl that the men wore, throws it around her so that the image, a silhouette given is she's a man. And she takes a dagger, puts it in her mouth, and climbs out of the window. I mean, this is like, you know, literally Hollywood type of stuff we think about. But this is exactly what the books of Sirah say. You know, she takes that dagger, she climbs out of the window, and in pitch darkness she tries to find this man. Where is he climbing? There's a man climbing up and he's speaking to his companion down below. So she completely surprise attacks him, jumps on him, slits his throat, right? And that, by the way, requires force. Slits his throat, throws the head down to the companion, right? And the companion shrieks and runs away thinking that the place is guarded. So khalas, they've been saved, thinking that they've been guarded. Then she comes back in and says to Hassan, go get his armor and weapons, his cell basically, go get his armor and weapons so that we can benefit from this, you know. And he says to her, I have no need of them. I don't need them, right? I have no need of them. Now, radiyallahu anhu, radiyallahu anhu. Now, what is the purpose of me narrating these? Now, these stories are all mentioned in the books, by the way. Astaghfirullah, I'm not bringing anything new. And these are stories, frankly, most of you have never heard, at least about Hassan and whatnot. Why? Because it is our culture and custom to just cover up. And a lot of it is good. We should cover up. But this narration is found in authentic books of hadith, in the books of seerah and whatnot. Now, by the way, some modern authors have tried to reinterpret and say, no, this is not true, and Hassan couldn't have been like this. But honestly, their arguments are emotional. Like, how could he have been like this? I mean, all the books mention it. It's not Ibn Ishaq mentions it. Muslim Imam Ahmad has the riwayah of Abdullah ibn Zubayr. He's the one let's just be.
If he'd done something like that, there would be.
Let's have Q&A at the end, Yakhi. One of the problems is if you interrupt, then everything gets stopped. Let's have Q&A at the end. The fact that there's no shi'r against him doesn't mean anything, by the way. That doesn't mean anything. Because his criticism of the other tribes is about their pedigree and their lineage. To respond, they need to criticize the pedigree or lineage of the tribe, of the Muslims or whatnot, right? As for personal faults or flaws of Hassan's, this is really irrelevant. He is smearing the entire qabila, right? And the fact that there's no poetry, awwalan, doesn't mean that it didn't exist. It simply means the books of seerah didn't need to mention it. As it is, the books of seerah mention Islamic poetry more than they mention the opponent's poetry, as it is. Obviously, we have a bias to preserve our poetry. Why should we preserve what the Quraysh said about us? Frankly, what the Quraysh said about the Prophet has not been preserved either, right? By and large. Exactly, it is, but that doesn't. But with the Quraysh's poetry against the Prophet did not reach us, by the way. The much of which Hassan responded to did not reach us. In other words, what Hassan is responding to did not reach us. My point being, this is an emotional argument. It's an emotional argument that cannot withstand the explicit texts that are pretty explicit in this point. Now, my point is as follows, and you hear, for example, this is the exact argument that is used, one of the arguments used, but this is all modern, you don't find this in medieval textbooks, that Hassan couldn't have been like this because it's not appropriate, because there's no poetry against him. Okay, that's an argument. Let me just say, what is my purpose in quoting these things? Astaghfirullah, is it to make fun of a sahabi? A'udhu billah. Making fun of a sahabi is a sin, a'udhu billah, right? Radiyallahu anhu. My purpose is actually very, very significant. It is as follows. Hassan ibn Thabit, the fact of the matter is, radiyallahu anhu, there are some, negatives on his resume as well. This is one of them. We just discussed another one last week. Have we forgotten last week? Right? What happened with him there? Frankly, that is worse than this issue, because this is a issue beyond his control. Some people are created this way, right? Some people are like this. And as I said, generally speaking, artists by and large, they have this type of mentality. It's not something, what happened last week, which is in Bukhari and whatnot, that's much worse than this issue. Now, why am I mentioning all of this? Well, a number of reasons. Firstly, to demonstrate really the humanity of our tradition, of the Sahaba. We have a tendency to make them superhuman. Now, the problem with that is, then we can no longer relate to them. This is the problem. It's healthy for us to know that some of the Sahaba committed some sins that they repented from, that Allah forgave them for. It actually makes us feel, you know what? Maybe if I also committed a sin in the past, maybe Allah will forgive me as well. You see my point here, right? There's a positive element that they become a role model. All of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum wa radu an, all of them. Hassan is definitely amongst them, right? And Allah explicitly mentions that he will be forgiven after the punishment was done. Khalas, he's forgiven, right? The second point, which is really to me the most important or the most profound point really, that despite these scars on his resume, despite these issues, look at the positives about Hassan. Hassan ibn Thabit was the official poet of the Prophet ﷺ. Hassan ibn Thabit was the one who, when the Quraysh wrote a poem, the Prophet ﷺ said to Hassan, "Qum ya Hassan, stand up O Hassan and go and defend me. And the angel Jibreel will be with you." The angel Jibreel will be with you. So the angel Jibreel is basically whispering, which is ilham, which is the type of wahi that is allowed to non-prophets, because there's something that is allowed to non-prophets that's called ilham, right? And ilham is the whisperings of the angels basically. This is ilham, like the mother of Musa. She's not a prophetess, but she gets the ilham, right? So the angel Jibreel is with you, O Hassan. And Hassan ibn Thabit, he had a special mimbar erected for him, the only Sahabi that we know of, that he had a mimbar on the side that was called the mimbar of Hassan, that he would stand and recite his poetry on while the Prophet is alive. In the time of the Prophet he has his own mimbar. He doesn't give khutbahs, he's not a khatib, he's a poet. And it's also mentioned in the books of history, and it's also in Abu Dawud and others, that Umar ibn al-Khattab, and you know Umar ibn al-Khattab, he was a very stern man. He enters the masjid and Hassan is giving his poetry in his khilafah. So Umar takes his stick, he would always carry a stick, and pow, right? Hassan got very irritated. And he said, "Why are you hitting me?" Obviously. He says, "You are saying poetry in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, how dare you?" And Hassan said, "Wallahi, I have said poetry in it when there was someone in it far better than you." True? True. And then he turns to Abu Hurairah and he says, "O Abu Hurairah, I ask you by Allah, didn't you hear the Prophet ﷺ say that day," and he mentions whatever that day was, that day, that "Stand up O Hassan and write poetry and the angel Jibreel will help you." And Abu Hurairah said, "Yes, he did." Right? So Hassan ibn Thabit has such an honorable role. The official poet, angel Jibreel helping him. Wallahi, isn't it a bit comforting to know that he's also human? And this leads me to my real main point, and that's the reason, wallahi, the only reason that I bring these things. Otherwise, frankly, there's no wisdom in mentioning some of these negatives. Khalas, let it be forgotten. But by the way, this one is mentioned in the books. Most of these negatives have not been narrated down. And they are negatives that Allah has forgiven. But the main wisdom, in my opinion, is the following. Every single one of us, we have a unique role to play. And our sins or our weaknesses or our shortcomings should not hold us back in stepping up for that role. You see, Hassan ibn Thabit, he knows his weaknesses. The public knows his weaknesses at the time, obviously. At the time, everybody knows. That's why without even any saying, he's automatically put with the women and children. Khalas, go with them, right? And he tells Safiya, "Don't make it worse than it is. You know my problem." Everybody knows it, right? And of course, what happened, what we mentioned last week, it's a public event. This punishment was done in public, right? Now, when the Prophet ﷺ told him, "Stand up and defend me," did he say, "Ya Rasulullah, I'm not qualified, you know this, you know that, who am I?" Or did he realize perhaps in this is his izzah and forgiveness? And this is the point that I find, wallahi, very heartening, very, this is the role model. This is exactly the point. All of us, we can sympathize with Hassan's weaknesses because, wallahi, I and every one of you have much more weaknesses than he did. We have far more problems than he did. Yet when his time came to shine, what did he do? He stood up and he did what Abu Bakr could not do, what Umar could not do, what Uthman could not do, what Khalid ibn al-Walid could not do, what Abu Hurairah could not do. The role of Hassan was a role that none of the Sahaba could do. They aren't poets like he is. And so his role was a role that was unique to him despite his shortcomings. And for me, wallahi, this is the humanity of the Sahaba that makes them perfect stars. That's what one hadith says, that my Sahaba are like the stars. There's ikhtilaf about authenticity, but the concept is definitely true, that my Sahaba are way up there. And for me, quoting you these negative things, in my humble opinion, it makes them more like stars we can actually look up to, right? Next time I find an opportunity to do good for the ummah, or you find an opportunity to do good for the ummah, don't let shaitan come to you and say, who are you to benefit the ummah? Have you forgotten this? Have you forgotten that? The true Muslim recognizes his sins. He's always guilty of his sins. He never dismisses, but he never uses a sin to stop from doing some good. This is the point, right? Never uses a sin to stop from doing some good. In any case, I really wanted to talk about that issue because I find it, as I said, very pertinent to the issue of having role models of the Sahaba. This is the issue of the fortress of Al-Fari', of the fortress of the Banu Haritha. Getting back to the issue of the Khandaq, getting back to the issue of the trench. So the Prophet ﷺ agreed to build this trench, to dig this trench, and he assigned 10 people for every portion of this trench. Now, the exact length of the trench and the exact location is really not known. After all, there were no, detailed maps of Medina that the Sahaba are going to sit down and say from here to here. And so any estimation that we have in our times is exactly that, an estimation. We really don't know for sure. But some modern authors who have really gone into depth about researching the seerah, and amongst them is my own Sheikh Safir Rahman. As you know, he is also one of the famous authors of seerah, and also my Sheikh in Sahih Bukhari and others. Sheikh Safir Rahman and others, they, after living in Medina for 10 years, so he's doing research on site literally, he calculates that the trench was around 2 kilometers long. It was around 2 kilometers long and around 13 feet wide, usually 13 feet wide, at times 10, at times more than 10, and between 7 to 8 or 9 arms, yani dhira' basically, depth, right? Now, the question arises, why only 2 kilometers? How about the rest of the city? And this has led to basically some research and some pondering, and it seems that the only feasible response is the most obvious one. And that is, Medina was naturally protected by 2 things. Number one, the harras. And the harra sharqiyya, harra gharbiyya. The harras are the volcanic rocks, right? And as I said, if you go outside of Medina, you can still see them. If you go in the plain, I have seen this all the time outside of Medina. These rocks are literally, it looks like to me, once there was a volcano thousands of years ago, and the volcano just spread for miles and miles around, a layer this thick, basically, right? And so wherever it spread, you have these weird shaped rocks everywhere, and it's almost impossible for an army to walk on them, And there's no vegetation, there's no water, and these are just rocks. So there was a large mound or area in the west and a large area in the east. This is harra sharqiyya, harra gharbiyya. To this day, by the way, the 2 areas of Medina are called sharqiyya and gharbiyya to this day because of those rocks. And then, so these 2 basically protect a large portion. And then the rest of Medina that was in the direction of the army attacking were plantations, date palms. And when you have dense date palms, you cannot have 10,000 men marching through it. Okay, you cannot have an army that is potentially going to harm you. This is the only logical response, and frankly, it's the most obvious one. So the most obvious answer is the most realistic one, that the only stretch of land that could allow them to enter Medina 10,000 strong. So their numbers proved to be a negative against them. Had they been 10, you cannot stop 10 people from coming, right? But they're 10,000. 10,000, you need a massive area to walk, the horses, the camels, the supplies. So they analyzed the area of Medina, and they realized that they need to dig basically 2 kilometers long. Now 2 kilometers digging, by the way, think about that, right? 2 kilometers digging. From here to the Houston levee would be how much?
Half a quarter.
Half? Quarter? I mean, I would say, yeah, I mean, maybe a little, yeah, a little bit less than half, I think, right? A little bit less than half, I would say, right? From here to Houston levee, that's half. 4 times that amount. Now, they don't have bulldozers. They don't have machines. They don't even have manpower from slaves. Medina did not have a lot of slaves, right? Unlike other cities, this is a human effort to dig a trench so wide and so deep in a matter of less than 10 days. That was the only option that they had. And the point was to simply stall the army, because you cannot prevent them forever. To stall the army and wait for some type of other plan or whatnot, right? And this is, frankly, it was an act of desperation, because this is a temporary tactic. It's not a permanent tactic, right? And so, immediately, the Sahaba got to work non-stop. They began working day and night. And each and every member of the Sahaba, from the poorest to the richest, participated. And even the Prophet ﷺ himself participated in the physical digging of the trenches. And the Sahaba mentioned that this was one of the greatest motivational factors for them. When they saw the Prophet ﷺ in the trenches with them, digging away, this was a motivational factor for them, obviously. And Anas ibn Malik narrates, and he was of course a young child at the time, that the Prophet ﷺ went out to the trenches, and the Muhajirun and Ansar were digging on a cold evening. So this is in the winter, and it's freezing cold, and they're digging in the evening. They don't have opportunity even to stop at night. And Anas explains, we had no slaves to help us. Meaning, if he's talking when they're much older and wealth has come in, so he's telling the younger people of the time, if you wondered why we were doing it, we didn't have the luxury you guys have. We had to do it ourselves. And when the Prophet ﷺ saw how tired and hungry they were, he made a dua for them, and he said that Allahumma la khayra illa khayra al-akhirah. Oh Allah, there is no good except the good of the akhirah. Farham al-ansara wal-muhajira. So have mercy on the Ansar and the Muhajirun. And they responded back to the Prophet ﷺ that we are the ones who gave you our oath to the Prophet ﷺ upon jihad. As long as we live, we will do this. So they're versifying poetry back to him. Al-Bara ibn Azib, another famous Sahabi of the Ansar, he said, I saw the Prophet ﷺ on Yawm al-Khandaq, and he was carrying the dust for so long that his entire chest hair was covered with dust. Now this means therefore he had taken his shirt off, and he's sweating with them, literally, just like all the other men, he's sweating with them. And Al-Bara says, and he was a man who had a lot of chest hair. Now our Prophet ﷺ had a lot of chest hair on his chest, and he had a lot of chest hair, and all of it was covered with the dust of carrying the trenches, and he was saying poetry along with us. Now when you're doing manual labor, you have to versify something, or just break the monotony, or just work in sync and harmony. And so he was versifying along with us. Allahumma lawla anta mahtadayna wala tasaddaqna wala sallayna فأنزلا سكينة علينا وثبت الأقدام إلا قينا إن الأعداء قد بغوا علينا إذا أرادوا فتنة أبينا أبينا. And when he got to أبينا أبينا, they would all raise their voices, أبينا أبينا. So they would all say it in unison, in choir. And of course this means Allahumma lawla anta, oh Allah, were it not for you, we would not be guided, nor would we give charity, and we would not pray. So send your peace down upon us, and make our feet firm when the enemies come to us. Verily the enemies have transgressed upon us, and when they want a fitna, and here fitna could mean shirk, fitna could mean death, abayna, we refuse to listen to them. And many are the miracles that are narrated, but time is basically up, so we need to leave some time for Q&A. Inshallah, we'll continue next Wednesday talking about the miracles of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and what happened. And this, I mean, so many miracles about food, a number of miracles about food, a number of miracles about the famous rock that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam broke, and the predictions that he gave. Inshallah, all of this we will have it next Wednesday, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And just a few minutes left, so Q&A time. And also, before I forget, announcement, we made it yesterday as well. So the fiqh of zakah class has been postponed by popular demand. there was a clash with another event, so we are doing it on, what is the date? Can you remind me? I will check right now. So instead of the 28th of April, the fiqh of zakah is now being held on the 5th of May. Yes, the demands of a very important part of our community. Don't worry. So on the 5th of May, on Sunday, we'll be having the fiqh of zakah. And inshallah, the flyer will be sent out by Danish soon. Inshallah. Any questions about what we have covered so far? You want to still continue, Hassan, or you want to?
I mean, you get them. I mean, there's a lot of books that says that لا يصح في حق الصحابة to say what they said about Hassan. So this story doesn't.
Jayyid, this is an opinion that you have taken from some modern authors, and it exists. I'm not going to not exist.
Yeah, all the books and even the official side of the Medina Munawwara says that Khandaq is 12 kilometers by 5 meters by 5 meters down. So this is...
Yes, there are many opinions. He's saying that one of the books mentions 12 kilometers by 5 meters. There are many opinions about this issue, and frankly, I read a paper a long time ago where somebody actually took the time to calculate how long would it take to dig such a trench. And 12 kilometers in 10 days by human beings who are around probably 10, even how long is it is an ikhtilaf, by the way. And even if you say 14 days, right? That's basically a kilometer, more than a kilometer a day. Or, you know, honestly, صراحة غير معقول, صراحة. I mean, being realistic here, غير معقول. The Sahaba, no doubt, were blessed, but they were not supermen. So Sahaba were blessed, but they were regular human beings, and they're digging more enthusiastically than workers our times would, but it's not as if with one scoop they will get what 20 people in our times will get, right? So a little bit of mathematics. I actually read a paper that figured out and whatnot, and 12 kilometers, even if you say 14 days, Jayyid, okay, you are quoting from a book, but again, in my opinion, what Sheikh Safir Rahman and others say makes more sense. Go ahead.
Do you know like the exact figure of how many men were digging? Was it all like 2,500 of them?
How many men, we don't know. Again, there's no statistics, but around 2,000 to 2,500, yes.
They
this
were
would
all
have been.
at the same time?
No, they were taking shifts, obviously, because people have to rest and whatnot.
Yeah.
But yeah, all of them participated. All of them participated. Yes, Asif.
We talked about some weeks ago when the Muslims laid a siege on the fortress of the Yahud. So in building a trench, does that tactic not force them to lay siege on themselves? Or is that something you'll cover next week? I mean, they're isolating themselves from the outside.
In building a trench, they did isolate themselves from the outside. And this was one of the problems. How long could the trench last? Because food supplies were diminished. Now, they did have some dates, but obviously you need other food supplies. How long will barley last you? Barley is not something grown right there. You know, other food supplies were running out. Meat was running out. You know, part of the living in a city, you get things in and out. And so when the siege lasted for more than a month, it severely affected the food supplies upon the Muslims. And in fact, these food supplies were already being affected, even when they were building the trench. And this is why I said that the building of a trench really was somewhat of a last move or a tactic or act of desperation. It's not a long term, because they can't have a long term at this point in time. They really have to put their trust in Allah and just delay. And that's exactly what they did. And of course, Allah will never fail His servants. And that's exactly what happened. Allah saved them. It wasn't a long-term tactic. It was simply a stalling tactic, and it worked. And Allah Azza wa Jal extricated them from that situation. Final question before time for the salah. No announcements, you sure?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Maybe one other thing to come when you talk about Hassan, about he was an artist, and you know, I think we have in our society we label people, you know, like Hassan, and that's maybe a lesson to learn, that we should not do nothing like this derogatory terms. I don't want to say.
Yeah, so the good point.
Like you said, God created people all different.
Yes, that's a good point. Brother Adil mentions that perhaps one of the other benefits we can derive is the fact that, I mean, the way that I'll put it is, there's a role for everybody in society. There's no need to put people in pigeonholes and use derogatory adjectives. You know, Hassan was not Khalid ibn al-Walid, neither was he Abu Hurairah, hadith narrator, neither was he Ibn Abbas, a faqih. I mean, we can even go a step further and say there is a place for artistry in Islam. There is a place for the fine arts. And Hassan demonstrates that, right? We need people like that to do things that, you know, and this is frankly, a lot of our younger Muslims, they don't, you know, especially those who are extra practicing or hardcore, whatnot, they don't understand that the ummah needs Khalid ibn al-Walid and Abu Hurairah and Ibn Abbas and Ibn Umar and it also needs Hassan ibn Thabit. It needs a little bit of variety, right? And that's a good point, that we just label people and we, you know, put them in a pigeonhole or box, and everyone has something to contribute, you know, to the ummah, inshallah. Yes, Doctor.
Was he given an excuse not to participate?
Yes, that's the point. His excuse was accepted. Everybody knew him. Yani, subhanAllah, this is a very deep point here, that everybody knew his situation. And so he's excused because his situation is known. And in fact, what he even tells Safiya, don't make it worse. You know my issue, don't make it worse, right? So it's something that we as community leaders or others, we need to take human beings into account as individuals, right? That some people simply don't have it in them to do certain things. That's, frankly, this shows us the humanity of the Sahaba, that they were just like us, in that in our society there are people that, you know, don't do this, don't that. I mean, subhanAllah, from going through school, I mean, come on. Some people can't stand mathematics, some people can't stand science, some people can't. But in the end of the day, don't we all find a little niche in society? We need people that can't do maths at all, because they'll do something else. We need people that love number crunching so much that all they do is add and subtract in their head all the time, right? Similarly, Hassan again has a role. Everybody knows what he cannot do, and what he can do, he stands up and he shines. And really, I think, to me, frankly, I find the story of Hassan very heartwarming, frankly. I find it very role model. Why? Because when I look at Abu Bakr, it's like, yani, he is. When I look at Hassan, I kind of sort of feel, you know what? Yani, like, there's similarities. I have sins, he has sins. You know, I have a role to play, he has a role to play, right? And personally, I think it's beneficial for us that his story has been preserved and these little issues have been mentioned. And ala kullin, I mean, and I want to make sure we understand, astaghfirullah, nobody's ridiculing, a'udhu billah. Nobody's ridiculing. Nobody's astaghfirullah. And if anybody understood this from me, and even though I was very careful, but if anybody understood this, astaghfirullah, it is not a part of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah to make fun of or ridicule any Sahabi. But narrating their faults for a wisdom is not ridiculing them. We have Sahaba who drank and they repented. We have Sahaba, well, all of this is in the seerah, right? Narrating their faults for a wisdom is not something that is considered cursing or ridiculing them, and this is the purpose of mentioning Hassan ibn Thabit. In any case, inshallah, we'll continue next Wednesday, and of course Tuesday is